Okay, and it's recording, and I didn't mention this to the new students, but when I say it's recording the class, it's only recording me, not you. So don't feel freaked out. Nobody's being recorded. Unless you ask a question, but nobody's going to be able to tell whose voice it is, I don't think. Unless you were listening. No, I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to call a student out. The first thing we're going to talk about today, and this is actually before you've read it out of the book, and I totally recognize that. I gave you a very simple reading from the book that actually has no quiz over it for the first reading, which was reading to write. And if y'all don't have your books yet, I mean, I don't want to give you something that was very simple, and it's only like, what, 15 pages long? And something that you could almost kind of skim through because it's just basic. So there's no quiz over it. So if you weren't able to get to that yet, don't feel bad. And that's not even what this PowerPoint is about. So I'm actually doing the PowerPoint over Invention and Arrangement before you actually read it. Though the quizzes do factor in general, what's on the PowerPoints, so that I try to only ask some stuff that can be answered completely from the PowerPoints and some stuff's from the reading. So keep that in mind next week when you're doing the quiz. And if none of that makes sense, Jasmine and Denise, what I've just said, talking about quizzes and stuff, every weekend I post, unfortunately it's like on Sunday because it's the last time I can get my computer to have time to render all the video. Every recording I do in class, I post on YouTube on, I guess basically like my teacher account on YouTube, and it might not be necessarily our video, it's whatever video I feel will be the best that week. But I try to, on the weekends, as soon as I get home, I'll edit the video, find out which one's the best one, render it, post it. I'm probably not going to be posting any of the Monday, Wednesday videos for the first 2 weeks at least, because they have Labor Day. Are y'all affected by Labor Day in your other college class? Which is what? History, which is like History 1, so it's like Texas, or is it American? U.S. It's like, is it Texas or U.S.? I'm in one of them. So y'all will be affected by Monday, Wednesday, Labor Day in there, but in this class, I'll kind of have a little bit more time, wiggle room, I guess, for the class. So I feel like it'll be more relaxed. So I'll probably post our videos for either our class or the one that I do later at 11. But I'll post the videos every week of what we talk about. So, long story long, Denise and Jasmine, y'all can go back and watch the first day and see all the syllabus stuff and, you know, what we talked about, what quizzes are, how we do them, and that kind of thing. Somebody tried to go to Blackboard yet? Who know how to use Blackboard at all? Because I've heard something from another teacher today. So we've all used Blackboard before? Everybody knows I mean not a physical Blackboard, right? Like not with chalk. Like, okay, so we do know how to use Blackboard. Is anybody simultaneously right now enrolled in, let's see, you're in history. I'm just curious, what are the other college classes that you're in right now? Speech. That's at Quinlan? What about Lonoc? What are y'all in? Government. Is that a Monday, Wednesday that you do at the same time? Okay. And that's the only college classes y'all are enrolled in right now?
Psychology.
Quinlan's also in, what was that, college algebra? Or Lonoc's college algebra. Quinlan's psychology. Oh, learning frameworks?
Yeah.
You took psychology, but now you're taking learning frameworks?
Yeah.
We have a college class tomorrow.
I'm just very curious as to what people are enrolled in at the same time as me. So with Quinlan, it's learning frameworks, history, speech, English. Lonoc is college algebra and government. Me. Okay. Interesting stuff. So let us get into today's discussion, which is invention, which you haven't read yet, but you'll kind of see now the outline for before you read. We're going to talk about invention, which is, it sounds like I guess a more complicated word for what I usually would call it, which is going to come up when I turn the thing on. Pre-writing, something that students in general don't do. That's the stuff you write before you just start writing. It's the part of the process you're coming up with ideas. Or how many of you like just start writing an essay and then when you're done it's over? That's usually a lot of people. So there's like probably 10 of you said yes, 10 of you are liars or just didn't feel like responding, and the rest maybe plan things, but not everybody does. I do want to mention too, sometimes students feel the need to, I have particular feelings about highlighting, and I have particular feelings about taking notes in classes. It's not important to write down every single word you see on a PowerPoint, nor is it important to highlight. If you ever see like a text that somebody has, like if you ever go to Half Price Books and get like a textbook or like a Shakespeare like play edition, because I know all of you are going to just do that. But if you go and pick a Shakespeare play off the shelf and you open it up, often it's like high school students who are like, thank heaven I can sell this. And you open it up and like all the lines are highlighted because they really don't know what they're doing. Like they don't know what's the important information and what's not. So it's like try to really figure out like what's the key information, what are the keywords, terminology, boil down what's said to like the basics. Because I'm going to cover a lot of things, but you only have to get like the basic, I think, ideas in note taking. Additionally, I post all of my PowerPoints on Blackboard. So they're there in a PowerPoint section. So you don't have to feel like rushed to write down every single thing. Hopefully that's something that they'll tell you in learning frameworks. Those who are taking learning. Did you say you're taking it?
Oh, yeah.
I've already forgotten. Because it was something I said out loud. Did I already talk to you how I hate the phone? That's why I can't remember anything I hear out loud. Did I tell you anytime you come to me after class and tell me something that you think I should know, I will always tell you to email me. Good, that's going to happen. So just, if you email's the best way to make me remember things. I do think that though invention is called pre-writing and pre-writing is something a lot of people don't do, I do think that planning is important. I was the same as you back in the day. I would get so frustrated that I had to write an essay and I would just put it off to the last minute, hour before it was due. I was like, okay, let's do this. And then once I got done, I was like, should I read it again? Nah, and no, just a minute. Because why would you read it again? You might catch mistakes, which will make you do more things, and then maybe you'll hate the whole thing. So it's best not to worry about it, just send it. But I think planning is very important because sometimes if you don't plan, there can be like disastrous consequences. Granted, you are able to revise in my class, but I have noticed that once people have written something, they tend not to want to change it very much. So if you do planning, and then I have you revise later, and I make you change like a small thing, it's not going to be as big a deal. But if I tell you, throw the whole thing out and start from scratch, because it's that bad, it'll hurt your soul. So it's good to still do some planning, even though you're allowed to revise. I want you to take a look real quick at how dangerous it can be to yourself, not only yourself, but others, if in life you don't do proper planning. If somebody would hit the lights, can you reach the lights? Guy who's in the same area of the alphabet with the other two guys? I don't know the names yet. Let me see if I can get the sound here. I apologize, you are going to hear a little bit of bad language. You can ignore it if you like. So I apologize in advance. And so, if we get the lights again, you can see that despite all the great planning efforts of everybody on the team, one guy not having a plan can really screw everything up. So this isn't just effective for you in the individual sense now, but later. And also, I guess later when we have is this the class we're doing the group project? Yeah, the group project. Like you can really screw up your whole team later by not being part of the plan. So make sure you do planning, make sure that you know what you're doing going in, make sure you have some sort of sense of what you're going to do on the essay, and there are some certain steps that you can do to make sure that going in you've got a proper plan and that the essay will go as you hope it will go. One of those things is understanding the assignment. If you don't understand the assignment, which is what the teacher is looking for, then you're going to have very little chance of being able to perform successfully on it. If you want the best grade possible and you don't want to be completely off topic, make sure that you don't have just a basic idea of what the teacher wants. Like for example, I'll have a lot of students who on this first essay, because it's called narrative essay, some students are like, I know what a narrative is, and then they'll just start writing. But there's so much more to my topic than just narrative essay. But generally speaking, when I used to hand out like a paper copy, I could see students, all they would do is they'd highlight the word narrative and then down below, the word count. Yet there's so much more I'm looking for than just narrative and word count. You need to know exactly what's required of any particular assignment and then do exactly that. When you're talking about understanding the assignment, generally speaking, a teacher's going to have a length. Mine for the first one is, I mean, it's technically 500 to 800 words, but I generally find that the best ones are around at least 600. The instructor will generally set a length, but if a teacher assigns like a 3-page paper and says, I want a 3-page paper, guys, like for example, your history or government teacher says 3-page paper. Don't think, oh, I've got a topic, politics. Like, their entire library is written on politics. Like, you need something a little more specific, manageable within 3 pages. So think, okay, what could I reasonably cover in 3 pages? And a good thing to keep in mind is if the Wikipedia page looks longer than 3 pages, you probably shouldn't take that. You know, like if it just has that look. So with only 3 pages, you may only be able to write about the social politics of high school art classrooms and the distribution of materials. That sounds manageable. And what that basically means is just a lot of words for some reason, the art teacher wants to be popular amongst the students. So she gives the ones that seem to be the most popular the best stuff. Hopefully it doesn't happen at your school. It happened at mine, which is why I've put it down. I had all these friends, they were like in art. I wasn't in art, I was in band, you could choose. But they were like, yeah, I can't ever get like oil paints because like she keeps giving them to all the football kids to make high school like tiger banners. So I was like, oh, sorry. Join band. They were like, no, hell no. It's a lot of work. Purpose. So you need to understand 2 different types of purpose here. I really don't like my slide that much, so I'm just going to say what I want to say. But I think the 2 types of purpose here, which is weird because I wrote it. But the 2 different types of purpose are your purpose when approaching the assignment and the person's purpose who made the assignment. So what is their purpose for assigning this to you, and what is your purpose for doing it? And your purpose may be, more than one thing. You may have multiple purposes, like you want to get a good grade, but you may also want to become enlightened. But more realistically, you want a good grade. Yeah. And so you should ask yourself the purpose of any piece of writing before you begin. Not just your purpose, but the purpose on the other end. Is it a cover letter for a resume to get a job? So not only do you think my purpose is to get employed, but their purpose is to find a good employee. So you have to present yourself in such a way that they would want to hire you, not just, like the weirdest thing is like when people get a job, they ask, is there anybody trying to get a job before? You've done like an interview, and then like they ask you, do you have any questions? 2 like the worst questions to ask are, like, because this should eventually somewhere be on like the resume, or like it should have come up in conversation. You don't want to say, yeah, like, how much will I be paid? Like, because that should have already been covered. If they haven't, they'll tell you when you get hired. You can always just say no if they hire you. 2 is, are there any like, not like benefits, but like, especially like if you work in like retail or something, you say like, yeah, are there any like discounts? Because they're just like, this person's just in it for like discounts and money. Like they don't care about our brand. And everybody, I think they know at their core that nobody really cares about their brand, but they want to think that you do. So you have to like present yourself in such a way. Is it a letter to a family member about a funny experience? First of all, nobody writes letters to family members. Does anybody still do that? It's like Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or Snapchat, right? It's not like those things. Is it a research paper to be submitted to a research journal for publication? So they want to look like they're putting out a good publication. You want to be published. So there's that interplay between both purposes. You got to know the purpose for the piece of writing, and it can tell you a lot about how it should be written. When looking at purpose, that generally will tell you what type of writings to fit into your essays. The 3 main types, or at least the 3 of the ways to categorize them that's kind of easy, are expressive, informative, and persuasive writing. But they can mix. Like you don't just have to do one or the other. Expressive writing makes up quite a bit of things like journals, personal emails, Facebook messages, narrative essays, because they're writing intended to convey personal feelings and impressions to readers. Informative writings, they want to basically, just as it sounds, inform readers about a situation with facts. things like lab reports, essay exams, history reports. The word report, is essentially you should be reporting facts. Persuasive writing is where you're trying to persuade a reader to think or act in a certain way regarding a topic. Things like editorials, argumentative essays, research papers, blogs. Blogs is one of those you can look at where sometimes, people are trying to write a blog to persuade people how to think. But sometimes they're just expressing their emotions, so it might just be expression. Maybe they're telling somebody heavily about their day, so it's more informative and expressive than it is persuasive at all. So each one of these types of writings might have more or less of one of the other types. But you can have expressive mixed with informative, expressive and persuasive, informative, persuasive, all three. Generally, I'd say the kind of type that has all three are generally like speeches. Like generally speeches will do all three pretty regularly. Audience. It's very important to know when you're writing also as well, who is your assigned audience? Not just your intended audience, but the assigned audience. So you're writing for your teacher generally, or in life, whoever it is that you're writing for. But you may also be assigned a particular audience. So if they say like write an email to a family member, so you have to be aware of both the teacher reading the email you write, but also try to convincingly write to a family member and sound like legitimate, like it's something you would really write to your family. But in knowing who you're supposed to be writing to, you also have to, like if they say write an email to a family member and they want you to be accurate, but at the same time, for example, if you know that your teacher is a very conservative Christian, you're writing an email to a family member, say, well, in all honesty, if I'm writing an email to my family, we cuss like sailors. So I'm just going to, write a whole bunch of curse words in there. You got to be aware that it's also your conservative Christian teacher who's reading that. And so you have to not maybe almost act like the situation is one that you wouldn't generally curse in, and then like consider it that way. Because you have to be aware that there's not just the audience that you're assigned, but the audience that's really there, the teacher, and you don't want to say things that would offend them. And that also brings up occasion or situation. I was going to say, write that email almost like you're talking to your family in church. I haven't met a lot of people who just openly curse in church. There's just something like we know how to turn it off. Even if you're like a Christian, you don't walk into a church cursing, because there's just some sort of sense of seriousness or respect there, no matter who you are. Even in like churches that have rivalries, like I've not seen anybody who's like, yeah, I don't really like the Methodists. They walk in there and just like curse. Like it's not something I've ever seen before. Occasion can always dictate, or it says occasion in the book, but I like situation better, because like you can have, you might talk to your family differently at church than you would at home. You might talk to a boss differently at work than you would when you're hanging out with them after work, because I'm assuming that there's some people who actually hang out with their bosses after work, right? I don't really know. Like you might know your boss and that's how you get hired and you actually hang out with them. But you can't like say, whoa, last night was lit, at work. Because, I'm sorry, I just learned that word. So. I'm talking about night. I knew lit. So cool points up, down. Down? That's what I'm shooting for. I'm trying to get less cool over the course of the semester. Yeah, so just make sure that you're always aware of not just who you're writing to, but the situation. Should I mention this? Yeah. I mean, this is not just something that can apply to writing, but I call sometimes like when you have a really embarrassing situation that you weren't prepared for the situation. You knew who you were going to see, but not the situation. I call this I generally call it a tube top at a funeral scenario. Because if you see somebody wearing a tube top at a funeral, like, good Lord, they even know they were coming here. They just end up here. But like one time I had like a big work meeting for or it wasn't a work meeting, it was like something that was celebrating A&M Commerce and PJC and their relationship. And it was like a gathering, everybody comes and meets there. And so I went and like went on a bike ride and then took a shower and then came in like jeans and like a V-neck. Is that what you call it? Like it's not the circle, it's the V? Is that what it's called?
It's not a crew neck, it's a V-neck.
It is V-neck? Okay, it just didn't sound right. It sounded bad. So I show up in a V-neck with like wet hair, like it hasn't dried yet. And I'm wearing jeans and like flip-flops. I show up and like every major like person at my college, like every administrator, vice president, president was there. In addition, like all the people who came from A&M Commerce were just employees who came in their formal wear. And so everybody's wearing suit jackets, ties, slacks. And here I show up, and my wife's dressed nice too. And she was the reason I came because she works at A&M Commerce. I work here. I show up and I'm like the only person dressed like a hoodlum. And it was, I did not know the situation. Like I knew who I was going to see, but I did not know. I knew roughly who I was going to see, but not like all the people I was going to see or the situation there. And it was more formal, and I walk in, I'm like so embarrassed. And like my daughter's there, and she's like this big, and she's like, yeah. I'm like, I didn't know I wasn't supposed to bring you, shut up. And it was just like the most awkward. So you really have to be aware of like the situation in addition to the audience, because I knew who I was going to see, but not what the situation was. So just be prepared for all those kind of situations in life. So you can spare yourself some embarrassment and have things go the way you want. Once you've looked at the subject of your essay, you've looked at, okay, audience, purpose, what's the situation, then you can kind of start to move from having a subject over which you might think about to, and really the topic that you're going to be handling. So think about that stuff before you even start writing anything down, those things we just talked about. Then you can start actually doing some pre-writing. So there's different types of pre-writing that the book covers. There's free writing, brainstorming, journal writing, reading, and talking / questions for probing. I'll try to go through these fairly quickly. Free writing is where you just start writing, but it's never intended to become the finished product. It's like if you're literally having trouble thinking of anything, like you can't do brainstorming, you can't, just start writing just to get like your brain moving. Because if you've been watching Netflix for like the last 4 hours and suddenly you have to start thinking, you may just be like, duh. And so you need to start writing just anything to see what words will come out of your brain. That's what free writing is for. And then once you've free written to the point where you start moving towards some sort of topic, then you can free write with direction instead of just without direction and random. So those are the two types, free writing without direction, free writing with direction. And you literally just write down things, like you're not trying to like be grammatically correct or, you know, sound good. You're just writing for you. And I always say it's not an essay. It's never meant to be an essay. It's just to give you ideas. A lot of times it's tempting to just write your name at the top and turn it in afterwards. You're like, this could work. But you're just not supposed to do that. Like, for example, here's one where like in the middle I just gave up on all sorts of grammar. And like I said, I saw a car on the internet this morning that the bumper fell off and their letters in the plate said Whoopsie. It's hard to not just correct my spelling. I'm so used to knowing when I mistype something that it's figuratively impossible for me not to just hit backspace so I can fix my mid-sail. I just misspelled that one inartfully because I wanted to backspace. Ha ha ha. But if I get to the end of this and I'm typing, and then I go, you know what? I have enough words. Name, submit. Like it's gonna be awful. I'm gonna be like, what the hell is this? When I'm grading it. So you don't want to like ever think of free writing as something that you can submit because you can't. It's just meant to generate ideas, not meant to be something that you actually turn in. So if you go in knowing that you're just going to make it look ugly like this, then you're not going to mind so much when you can't turn it in. Brainstorming is the one that I like the best. I love brainstorming because it's generally just coming up with keywords, whether that's a word, a phrase, anything that pops into mind, but you can write it down quickly as it comes to you, which is what I think makes it kind of superior. It's really useful when time is a factor. Free writing, I think, is better for creative things like stories, poems, but I think brainstorming works better when writing something nonfiction or persuasive like an essay. You may have done this back in the day in school. Well, you're in school now, but I mean, like, you know, back when you were younger, they might have had you separate things into pro and con lists. Mm-hmm. But in like a narrative essay, you're not gonna have the opportunity to do that. Like, you can't like, well, you know, what's my first experience with violence or danger? All right, let's do a pro and con. Like, why would you? Like, Like it either was or wasn't your first experience. Like you can't really say it's with the pro situation here or the negative. Well, it was dangerous. So you can't really always do the pro-con list. It's just maybe how you first came into contact with it. It's all about taking your ideas related to the topic and listing them in a quick, simple fashion so that you can move on and get to the writing phase. And this is not, I don't think, a very good set, but in fact, I'm so tired of seeing this that I'm just going to get rid of this because I don't want people writing 5-paragraph essays. I mean, if it happens to be 5-paragraph, that's fine, but I don't want you trying to. Write an essay discussing, whether or not cigarette manufacturers should be allowed to advertise cigarettes on television. So I might just start brainstorming things I know about cigarettes, television, advertising. And I'm like, okay, what do I know about cigarettes? They're unhealthy. What do I know about TV? Kids watch it. Maybe that's what they're motivated for here. This is, however, freedom of speech issue, so I write freedom of speech. Then I get back to thinking about cigarettes. I'm like, cancer of lungs. It's expensive to smoke. Then I'm like thinking of entire phrases because now I've got the little keywords, but they're starting to generate ideas. And I'm like, why can't they advertise on television? It's bad, but it should be allowed. Not doing it can be fascist. I was feeling very angry that day, apparently. So you kind of can have keywords, or you can move into other things. They can be all mixed together. You see I'm talking about cigarettes, then TV, then basically philosophy, or like the why of it, and then I'm going back to cigarettes, different ideas. So there's no like rules for how it needs to happen. You can just start listing ideas to help generate ideas and move on from there. Another way that we do pre-writing, this is probably the most common way you've always done pre-writing, if you haven't even thought of it as that, is just talking. In the dual credit classrooms, generally speaking, y'all have an advantage that some of the other students don't have, is that you're all in the same place already. Like you leave here and you go to high school. Generally speaking, all the people here are well, not all the people, but there are people in here who are your friends that you see on a regular basis. Whereas in some of my other college classrooms, it's like people walk in the room, they don't know anybody, and then they go home. And so when they talk, they're going to talk with people at home, which you can also do, but you can also talk out with people who are also writing the same assignment. Conversations might go like, oh my gosh, this essay for Nichols, like what the heck? You're not going to say heck, but I'm thinking of my audience. What are you going to write about? It's like, I don't know. I haven't experienced anything dangerous. Maybe that time I ate yogurt past due date. And they're like, no, I don't think that he's going to be satisfied with that. He said he wanted it to be some big experience in our lives. And like, I don't know. Maybe I won't write about that one. If you had somebody die, I don't think I know anybody who's died. It's like, what are you writing about? It's like, well, my grandma died like last year. It's like, oh, right. That sucked. I forgot about that. It's like, oh, that's okay. But I mean, you're talking it out with somebody. You're trying to work out like what they're doing, and conversations are all the time like, what are you doing for this essay? That's a way that it's always been a way that we try to figure out ideas for papers. You might talk it out with your family, your mom. Generally speaking, when you talk to your family about ideas, unless you're like my parents were like dismissive. Not, my mom wasn't dismissive. She was just like, I don't really know what's going on, of like school stuff. And then my dad would like always have ideas, but it was basically whatever he told me to do is like I do the opposite. Because it was like he'd say, you know what you should do, and I'm like, here comes an idea I shouldn't do. What? And like he would just tell me, and I'm like, okay, don't do that. You tell that teacher. Like, that's not gonna happen. So either way, you can find somebody to talk to who's going to like help you generate ideas. Sometimes you'll hear somebody say the opposite of what you want to hear, and you're like, oh, that makes me think of what I should actually do. So I mean, talking is generally helpful. Journaling is helpful, but it's something that's not helpful unless you're already doing it. Like if you're looking for ideas for your narrative essay that you're about to do, or really any of the essays this semester, I mean, you can't be like, you know what I'll do? I'll start journaling, because that's not going to help you now. It's something you have to have already been doing. Does anybody know the most common types of journals that people already keep and don't realize it?
Texting.
Say again?
Texting.
So close. Like you're very close. It happens on the same device.
Okay, well, posting.
So close.
Posting on Instagram.
Yes, posting on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. social media, like people, you're already keeping a journal of your thoughts and ideas, assuming you post anything besides selfies. Do they still call them selfies?
Yeah.
I'm getting older. I don't know these things. Y'all, if I ever say anything that's not the lingo, tell me what the lingo is, and then I'll try to say it to my daughter and see if she's impressed. I'll also try to do the same thing. Like I use the word. I told her I promised her I was going to use the word lit today in some way. Like specifically with my dual credit students, I used the word lit last night. I said like she went to the attic in Greenville, and I said, "Was it lit?" And she goes, "Yeah, no." And I was like, "I'm gonna use that tomorrow in the class, like in an improper way." I don't know. It's fun for me to misuse lingo just to be fun. That's another thing that dates me is I'm using the word lingo. Slang. But what are we talking about? Journaling. So with the journaling, it's not going to help you like in the moment. You have to have already been doing it. And you've got Facebook, you've got Instagram. If you've done anything besides take selfies, you should have some information about things that are important to you or things that struck you. The only problem is like Facebook's search feature is terrible. Like you can't just say, "Oh, what's that time it's Hawaiian party?" and like you can't look it up. I've always used for the longest time I've used, so this is a note that I need to go take the flower box to Lowe's. But I used to use this as my actual like place I would write down ideas, but now it takes too long to pull it out of my pocket and get the pen ready. So I just use the notes app on my phone when I use that. You can use it as a place to like keep up with old ideas. And for the narrative essay, I would have found like, oh yeah, I forgot my granddad died like in May. So I could write about that. But I keep all kinds of just random thoughts like in here. And I suggest, I mean, it's just, does anybody not feel like, do you ever feel like, you ever had an idea and you lose it? That's what the notes app is for me. It's like, it just, instead of going away, like, I thought the Avian Member would be a great band name. Sounds like something that would be a band name. The word Hazan, and I came up in my dreams the other day, so I wrote it down. And it turns out it's a real word. I made a confession bear meme. Somebody heard of confession bear?
No.
It's like a bear that feels bad about what it's done. He just has that look on his face. I don't know. But this didn't actually happen. I just made it up. But I thought it was funny. So I said that I'm not a sexist. I just love their chips and salsa. That's what I titled it. And when you click it, it says, the bear says, "When my baby pooped her diaper at our favorite restaurant, my wife asked if the men's room had a diaper changing station because sometimes in Texas they don't. And I told her that unfortunately this one didn't. But it did." But I just really love their chips and salsa, so I didn't want to go change the baby. That's not true. I walked in there and I was like, yeah, they're going to have it and I'll have to change the diaper. And I went, oh, they don't. Oh, there you go. Like, I'll just eat chips and salsa. But I was like, what if it did? And I did that, but then. Yeah. So what are some other like better ideas that I have?
I did the same thing.
I thought, okay, this sounds weird, but I thought maybe someday shirts will have so much technology built in that they can display what's underneath, but modified. So it's like a camera, and then it shows what's outward. So it's not a clear shirt, but like a guy could have like his torso displayed on the outside of the shirt, and it looks like legit. But then you can have like tattoos on there that you don't actually want to get, but just want to display that day. You know, like Harambe, or something like that. You're not going to want to have on there forever, but it's like something you want to like. So like.
Why wouldn't you?
Or like, what was the thing? Like the thing on Facebook, or I don't know who has the filter right now, but the pray for Texas for Harvey. Like, he might be something you want to have like pray for Texas, like on your display on your shirt, and so it just displays like, and it looks like it's a tattoo you have. But I thought that'd be cool.
Buy any more shirts? You just have one shirt.
Yeah, you just have one shirt, and it becomes whatever you want it to be. That'd be really cool. I wrote down a quote that I liked from a play. So I wrote from The Amenities by Aeschylus. I wrote, "The cast of a single ballot can restore a house entire." A great quote about the strength of voting. I mean, just whatever ideas pop into my head, I write down. Does anybody do like high school theater? I don't know if this would be allowed, but have y'all ever heard of I can't remember what the name of it. I think it's like sulfur tetra or hexafluoride. Have you ever heard of that? You wouldn't know about this for theater. There's like a gas, like helium makes your voice higher and it's funny. On Mythbusters, there's another one that makes it lower. Like, and I thought it'd be really cool if like there were an evil character in a play, like to have like a hidden balloon of that, and then like, and it was like, oh my gosh, what the hell? Like, what's happening? And so that'd be really cool. So I don't know, I just write down these ideas I have all the time, and then occasionally I go, oh crap, I need something for something. Like every video I have in my class was just me basically saving links to videos that I liked. And then when I started teaching, I went, oh, I could use this. And then I was like, what about that one with the guy on World of Warcraft? And I was like, Leroy Jenkins? And I looked it up and I was like, there it is. And so I was able to make lessons out of it. So I mean, it's helpful for not just writing essays, but it ended up being helpful in my job. It could be helpful in your job later if you were to just, jot down your ideas all the time. Don't let them fly away. Keep them. Reading. Not a lot of people do reading, but you should. Not just reading like books and things, but also reading news, keeping up with the world. That'll be really helpful for like near the end of our class when we have essay 3, the comparison contrast essay, which requires you to go out and find like news items. And then also research paper requires you to talk about something that's going on in the world today. If you don't know anything about the world, it's going to be very hard to talk about it. Or to find an idea for the paper. If you're like, I don't really know what's happening in the world, I don't care. I'm like, well, you need to fix that. So just reading everything that's out there. And I'm not just talking about like sticking to Facebook, but trying to find actual news out there to see what's going on can be very helpful when trying to come up with ideas. By the way, you should always click a source. I found recently, have y'all heard the Joel Osteen thing that's been like going around? Like he didn't open his church to like did y'all hear about this? Like he wouldn't open his church to like the flood victims.
Oh yeah.
From what I've gathered, there's all the people posting to these news sites, right? And so they're posting like a news article, but then mostly people are reading the commentary about the link and not clicking the link. Most of these news websites, what I've gathered is a few years back when there was flooding, the Lakewood Church of Joel Osteen flooded. So you wouldn't want your place floods to be like a #1 place people go for flooding victims. Like it's going to be like the backup to the backup because it might flood. And so people were like, Joel Osteen won't open his church. And he was like, what? No, we're helping with the efforts and like we're doing all that stuff. And they were like, okay, well I guess because there was all this public shaming going on, they said, I guess we'll open it up as a shelter, although we're not really sure how safe that is. And then people are like, look at this, Joel Osteen only opened his church after being publicly shamed. What a jerk. And it's just this weird story I've seen take off, and Joel Osteen, he's not really doing anything wrong. It's like because some guy with a mattress store started, and if you think about it, really kind of irresponsible. If he doesn't know like if his stores will flood or not, it's kind of irresponsible to just open it up and say, I'm a shelter, and then all of a sudden your store floods, and you're like, oh, my bad. We're not safe here either. But Joel Osteen knew his place flooded, so he didn't really want to open it up, and so it's just been this whole crazy story that's gotten out of proportion. And I don't even like Joel Osteen, but I can recognize that he's being like attacked in the media unjustly based on the news stories that I've seen written by actual journalists. But people who are posting on Facebook with look at how big a jerk Joel Osteen is. I just don't think it's fair. Kind of like the same thing that happened to DeMario on Bachelor in Paradise. I watched Bachelor. Guy was like had to deal with all this like you're a rapist and he didn't rape anybody. That's the weirdest thing. So reading I think is a good thing. Grouping ideas and organizing. So once you've got ideas, you start grouping them and organizing them. Basically with clustering, you take the ideas you've brainstormed and start putting them in more of an order. So I might, and you can also add in this phase as well. You don't feel like okay, I have to have all of my ideas and I can't make new ones. No, you can always generate new ideas even in the clustering phase. So I go with my freedom of speech idea, and then I start thinking about stuff that goes with freedom of speech with the cigarettes. And I think, okay, well, yeah, it's unhealthy, which was one of my other keywords, but really shouldn't matter if it's unhealthy, if it's freedom of speech. It should be illegal to tell them not to do that. Because beer can still advertise on television. Why can't cigarettes? They're both unhealthy. Exceptions to freedom devalue freedom. If you've got a freedom and you say, well, this is an exception, then that's a huge problem. And so I've kind of come up with these ideas in addition to that one when I put them under a freedom of speech category. So there's nothing wrong with adding new ideas in the clustering phase. Some people like visual clustering or taking your brainstorming and doing it that way. Maybe writing on Post-it notes, putting them in places so you can see where they are before you start writing. It's a way to do it. And by the way, I don't know what any of these say because they're all in German. but you can still get the visual idea of what he's doing. He took all of his ideas and wrote them in the yellow ones are over here and the greens over there. Webbing is another way of clustering. If you can make it work for yourself, and you did back in the day, that's fine. I hate it. I hate webbing. I don't understand it. It's like, to me, the most ADD, ADHD way of like taking notes in the world. Because like if somebody says, okay, I want you to write an essay about fish, and you're like, okay, fish. What do I know about fish? There's types of fish. There's fish parts. There's sayings. There's habitats. What if fish are cut bait? Smells fish, fins, gills, scales, freshwater, overfishing, dams. Like it's just you don't really know what you're doing, so you're just writing down every single thing you could ever think of about a thing, and that's just I don't see how that's necessarily effective. It's almost like free writing, but it looks a lot scarier. If you can make it work for yourself and you're like, but that's how I write every paper. If it works for you, use it. But I wouldn't suggest adding this to your repertoire if you, repertoire, that's a fun word. If you, the collection of things that you use and utilize. I wouldn't suggest doing that unless you've already done it before and it's worked for you. It's generally something they do in elementary school because it's fun to draw. Now once you've got stuff clustered and in general places, you could start outlining. As far as I know, every essay that's got to be written is, for the most part, has to be written like one word after the other, one sentence after the other, one paragraph after the other. So it's got to be in a linear fashion. I've never had a teacher before say, you know what, guys, what I want you to do is just write like 10 paragraphs, and you can put them wherever. And so like one kid's like, oh, here's my submission, and it's like I put this paragraph over here, but this one's down here, and this one's there, and this one's up here, because I just feel like it looks better than that. I've never heard that happen. So outlining, I think, is a good idea because it puts things in an order, as you can see. And generally speaking, most papers will, this is like a 1 for a 5 paragraph essay, which is the only one that I had made. But it does follow the basic guideline for most nonfiction writing, which is you'll introduce a topic in some way. You'll have body paragraphs that support usually your thesis, the main idea, and then you'll conclude what you talked about. That is generally going to work for nonfiction writing of almost any length. Even like you read, like I was talking earlier about a cover letter for a resume for a job. That would work for that as well, because you kind of need to introduce yourself, then give the reasons that they would want to hire you, and then conclude quickly by giving some sort of salutation, that kind of thing. This even works like sometimes introductions aren't like, somebody asked me the other day in a class, they said, well, where should the thesis go? You said thesis should be in the introduction, is that right? And we'll get to this more with the thesis part, but thesis should always just be at the end of the introduction, but the introduction can be multiple paragraphs. So don't think that an introduction can only be one paragraph, and the thesis is always at the end of the first paragraph. It's at the end of the introduction. There is an outline from the book where it's kind of like a narrative essay about cheating, and a guy decides to do it kind of chronologically. So he says that once in a test in high school, during the test, he thought the test was pretty hard, looked around to kind of see if anybody else seemed to be having problems, and saw that the dude was cheating. Then after the test, he got really angry. He really wanted to tell somebody, but then he dismissed the idea. He's like, I'm not going to tell anybody. But then later in college, he kind of started to understand the implications of cheating and understood the true goals of education, not just getting grades, but learning. And so he was able to arrange his paper chronologically, where he first got angry about it and then eventually figured out what the true meaning was. Now, this was from the book. So who do you think the intended audience was for this outline that they were showing?
Like the teacher.
Huh? The teacher, probably? So they want the teacher to know not to cheat?
Oh, like
Yeah, audience for the person they're giving the book to, you're absolutely correct. Like, who do they want to use it? Yes. But on the other end, so it's very clever both ways, like you said. Like, they want the teacher to want it because, like, oh, this will let my students to know not to cheat. But y'all are too smart for that. Y'all won't be tricked by that. I mean, I still want you not to cheat. But I think that you understood, right? That, this is trying to get into my head. Understand your audience, or that you're the audience. Let's talk about thesis real quick. If I was going to write down 2 of the slides, they'd be in the next few slides. This is one of them. according to the book, a thesis is an essay's main idea, the idea that all the points in the body of the essay support. A thesis may be implied, but it's usually stated explicitly in the form of a thesis statement. In addition to conveying the essay's main idea, the thesis statement may indicate the writer's approach to the subject and the writer's purpose. It may also indicate the pattern of development that will structure the essay. A thesis would look different in a narrative essay than it would from a cause-effect, a comparison, contrast, an argumentative. It's going to be shaped by the pattern of development for that paper. Also, a thesis should basically encapsulate everything that paper is trying to do. And that's why we kind of talk about it being the main idea. In your schools, your actual, I guess, high schools, have y'all talked about thesis before?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is that a big idea that's covered?
Yes.
I'm starting to wonder. I think I'm starting to figure out like what high schools are trying to do is take on a lot of the burden of college. Like, do y'all know what an adverb, a noun, adjective, all that stuff is? I have a lot of students who come to me like college and they're like, I don't know what those are. I always find that interesting, but I guess y'all do. So I'm trying to figure out who's not being taught what and why. But I guess it's not a problem for you guys since you've also heard of thesis and all that stuff. Is there any more time with this? Looks like everybody's, for the most part, done writing these words. Now, developing a thesis generally comes out of all the ideas that you've been following, coming up with. With that informal outline from the slide before last, the thesis might look something like this. Cheating keeps students from rising toward expectations and limits what they can achieve from grade school all the way to college, because that does cover the full timeline that he's talking about and makes some sort of value statement about cheating, which is kind of the goal of that paper. So that whole paper should be geared toward proving that point in a sense, or coming to that conclusion. It's the main idea of the piece of writing, the statement of what the other's trying to prove. Most of the time, I want you to directly state your thesis. Like, I want to be able to see it, and I want to be able to see a sentence that does this. So I don't just want there to be a thesis idea or an implied thesis. I want you to directly state it. Now, deciding on a thesis, don't think that it's permanent. Once you've picked one, you can always change it. When I was at TAMU Commerce, I had a professor there who said that when he was writing his doctoral dissertation for math, because he had a doctorate in math, I think, too, or maybe a master's in math, that the professor who read his 150-page dissertation underlined his thesis and wrote next to it, no. And then he went and talked to him about it, and the guy said, every conclusion you've drawn based on the data you've gathered is wrong. Like, it's the opposite. And so he had to go back, he had to rewrite his thesis, then he had to change all the value statements he was making about his data throughout the essay, or like throughout the 150-page dissertation to the other thing, handwrite that in. Then, because it was the days of the typewriter, he had to dictate what he wanted for his wife to type, and a few months later, he was finally able to get his doctoral degree. So don't think that your thesis is set. It can always change. Like if I say, this is not exactly what your paper is trying to say, I don't think you realize that, and you're like, oh crap. So you've got to like rewrite it from the sense of the opposite thing. That could happen. Now this is the other slide I think that I would write, because it puts it so simply. According to the book, an effective thesis statement will clearly express your essay's main idea, communicate your essay's purpose, and be clearly worded. Usually only professional writers regularly imply a thesis without stating it correctly, so I kind of want you to directly state your thesis. You'll clearly express your essay's main idea, communicate your essay's purpose, be clearly worded. Clearly express the essay's main idea, communicate your essay's purpose, be clearly worded. Clearly express your essay's main idea, communicate your essay's purpose, clearly worded. Clearly expresses your essay's main idea, communicates your essay's purpose, clearly worded. Are there still teachers who like purely lecture and they just want you to write down the things they say?
Yeah.
Really? That still happens? I thought it didn't happen anymore. Because I at least have PowerPoints, and I try to add details. Oh, did I already ask you about this? There's still ones that read PowerPoints, and that's all they do. Are there high school teachers that just read PowerPoints?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And they don't ever go outside the PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Oh my god. It's horrible. So here's some bad thesis examples. These aren't great because they're not clearly worded, they don't clearly express, they don't communicate it very well because they're too general. My instructor has an attendance policy. Well, that can be verified just by looking at the syllabus. Community colleges are awesome. Like, what way? How? Prove this to me. Facebook attracts college students. Like, what do you mean? How do you know this? Is this a problem? Like, I don't get it. And these are a little bit better, but still not great. So my instructor should change her attendance policy. Okay, now we know why we're looking at the attendance policy. Because it's bad. Yeah, but bad in what way? For many people, a community college makes more sense than a four-year college university. Like, what? Why? Like, what do you mean makes more sense? That's too general. Social networking sites like Facebook can cause problems. Okay, now I understand. You don't like them, but why? What problems? So these are a little bit better. My instructor should change her attendance policy because it is unreasonable, inflexible, and unfair. Okay, so now I assume that the whole paper will tell me about those things, show me how it's inflexible, show me about those things. For many people, community college is more beneficial than a four-year university because they are cheaper and more personal. Okay, so I hope that the essay will tell me about how they are cheaper and more personal. And social networking sites such as Facebook cause problems because they can relay news inaccurately to a large segment of the populace who use it as their primary news source. The Osteen example, great example. People are like, well, I hate Joel Osteen. And then you look at the news articles themselves, and it's like, oh, it's not that bad. And the one I was reading about, or I was talking about Bachelor in Paradise, that DeMario Jackson, like, said, like, some of the news sites that he clicked from Facebook literally told completely factually inaccurate situations. Like, they were like her friend was trying to pull him off of her, and he pushed her away and then kept, like, going, like, assaulting her. And her friend wasn't even there. Like, just like all these details that were completely made up from like these Facebook posts that people make. Well, I mean, I guess the importance of the thesis is what I'm really getting toward. It's the most important tool because it's a statement for a purpose of an essay. It's the reason the whole writing exists. Without a statement of purpose, why are you writing? And if you don't have a thesis, and this, you don't have to write this whole slide, but if you write this, without a thesis, you'll automatically receive no higher than a 50, even on a narrative essay. The narrative essay, you might end up implying it a little bit more than you're directly stating it, or it might only be stated near the end, depending on the situation. But I still want to have a thesis, a main idea for that narrative being told. It's not like in life where you're just telling somebody a story, like a regular narrative. There needs to be a reason for that story being told. Especially since I have a topic that asks you for such a thing. So what I'm going to do now is, rather than move on to the narration PowerPoint, I'm going to show you the narrative essay assignment, and these will all be on Blackboard. So won't take me too long. I'm just going to basically show you what it is and what I'm looking for. I may have time to go through the sample essay today, but if I don't, then we could always cover it next time. You could always start looking at this on your own. So I'm going to go to Blackboard, which is parisjc.blackboard.com. I'm going to go in my fake student. I think he's in the class, Magnus Baraka. I'm going to click our class that you see over here in My Courses. If you don't see that in My Courses, email me, let me know pretty fast, because you may have to email the help desk at parisjc.edu to get your class working. You'll see the syllabus page first every time, but if you'll go down here past the quizzes, which we have one that's due over the syllabus on Sunday, if you go past that and get to assignments, you'll see, oh, don't do this. Has anybody done this already? I have no idea why this has been made available. It's from like 4 years ago. It must have deleted my dates off of it. So don't do the computer usage survey. That's irrelevant. Oh, heck, if you want to, do it. I don't care. I mean, what is it going to do? Give me more data? That's not a bad thing. Essay 1, narrative essay. So there's two different file formats here. I provided it in docx and PDF. With the docx, you could actually probably erase the whole rest of the assignment, change the name for your name, and then start writing, because the formatting is already proper. You could just follow that. but the PDF you could probably use to look at for the assignment. It's assigned today, and it's going to be due week 3, day 1, so the day of the first group project. And there's a couple of different options on this narrative essay. So I want you to write a narrative account of one of these first experiences. Your first experience with physical violence or danger. Your first time in an unfamiliar surrounding. And that means surrounding physical, not situation. So some people have tried to say, well, my unfamiliar surrounding was when I got pregnant. And I'm like, that's not a surrounding, that's a situation. First encounter with someone whose culture was very different from your own, like somebody from a different culture. That could even be a different state if it was a widely different enough culture. Or somebody who lives in the same state, like maybe they're like from an Amish community, Your first experience with a serious illness or death of someone close to you. That's the most commonly done one, but a lot of times people will use a lot of what I call cliches, or that's just, everybody calls it that, but a cliche is a phrase that generally a lot of people use, or it's an idea that's overused. For example, people in the death essays always say, I remember perfectly when I got the call. There's always the call. I don't know why it's the call, but on the telephone, and I sunk to the floor and collapsed and started crying, or bawling is usually what they're like. I couldn't breathe. All those like common ideas that people talk about. And everybody's lesson they ever learn from somebody dying is, I learned to live life to the fullest. Which is just another way of saying YOLO. But make sure your essay includes a thesis statement that your narrative can support. And I could ask you this, but it may be a little bit difficult to come up with this on your own without me telling you. I mean, I can go ahead and ask. If I have all the essay topics are about your first experience with something, and I want your thesis to basically show what you gained from the experience, then what should your thesis essentially contain? Like, what is the purpose of the narrative essay if I want you to talk about your first experience with something?
How it affected you.
Yes, how it affected you. So essentially I want to not just be told what you learned, like live life to the fullest. I want you to show me since how you've lived life to the fullest. Because if you haven't, then you haven't learned anything. Some people tell me, yeah, I learned to live life to the fullest. Really, what have you done since? Nothing different. Well, then you didn't learn it at all. You think it's a lesson you might have learned, but you didn't. So this is the formatting, but if you just follow the formatting of the, you can read this to follow the formatting, but the thing you're mostly going to pay attention to is that you can write in first person, and I want you to, and it's 500 to 800 words. With the ignore this black box. So please ignore the black. But I'm going to grade you on your ability to narrate the event with vivid and perceptive details, to follow a clear chronological order, interest the reader through personal commentary and varying sentence structure. And we'll talk about that more next time. But exhibit differences between the time before the experience and afterward. That's the one people don't do. And contain a thesis that gives the narrative a reason for being written. It's the point your narrative is trying to express. I always will include a bold hint, which is usually the thing that people screw up on. So the thesis for the paper should directly relate to something that changed significantly within yourself from before the experience to afterward. You must show through evidence how you are different now than you were then. That's the whole point of talking about a first experience. Don't just tell me you've changed and expect the reader to believe you, because that's not great. Sample papers included below, and then Blackboard is where I want you submitting it in DocX or PDF format. Those are the only ones that consistently display correctly. Make sure that if you're using something like OpenOffice or Google Drive, you find under the File tab the word export, and then export it to PDF or DocX format, because that's the only way it's going to display properly on Blackboard. And then you just basically, when you go to and try to submit it, you'll attach it like it's a document, but I'll show you that later. There's some Blackboard help if you need Blackboard help, the whole page on the second page. And then Magnus Baraka wrote this essay. Don't title yours sample narrative essay with correct formatting. I want you to title it narrative essay, but it's just I put that so that you would know that's what this is. And I don't have time to read this whole essay, but I will go to the very last paragraph, and we'll read it on another day. But he talks about how he went to a football game and hadn't ever gone to one before because he's blind and has sensitive hearing. not fully blind, but he has very, very, very bad vision, just legally blind. And when he went to the football game, he was very worried it was just gonna be loud and it was loud, and he didn't know what was going on. But when he finally was there with his friends and he heard the singing and the band stuff, that he ended up having a really good time. And at the end, he says, it made me realize that I can overcome any surrounding I need to, despite my vision, if I want to badly enough. And I was like, well, prove it. And he says, I've experienced many activities and places with and without my girlfriend, and feel more comfortable reaching outside my comfort zone. Oh yeah, prove it. Whereas I may have only tried and enjoyed something as daring as Six Flags and a roller skating rink up to this point, but never anything quite like NASCAR or a tracker pull. I'm sure there's time to fit. So he has gone to Six Flags and roller skating. So he has gone outside of his comfort zone in further ways. So he's proved it to me that he's done it. So at any time that you're making a claim about what you've learned, you've got to show me how you've learned it. And then we'll go through the essay in more detail another time. But for today, y'all know where the assignment is. You can access it. You can start working on it. Y'all have a great weekend.
Yes, sir.